The first thing billionaire CEO Nathaniel Brooks noticed on his wedding night was not the wedding ring on his finger. It was the empty space beside him in the enormous bedroom. His new wife, Clara Bennett, the waitress he had married only hours earlier, was standing near the window with tears running silently down her face. Then she turned toward him, placed a small envelope on the table, and whispered that there was something he needed to know before sunrise. Nathaniel opened it expecting a divorce demand, a confession, or perhaps proof that she had married him for his money. Instead, what he found inside would force him to question everything he believed about love, loyalty, family, and even himself. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change a person's life and everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Nathaniel Brooks was 38 years old and had built his technology company from a tiny rented office into one of the most successful businesses in Chicago, Illinois. His name appeared in magazines, business reports, and television interviews. He owned a penthouse overlooking the city, drove expensive cars, and attended events where people smiled at him even when they secretly wanted something from him. But behind the wealth was a man who had learned not to trust easily. His father had abandoned his family when Nathaniel was young, leaving his mother, Margaret Brooks, to raise him alone. Nathaniel had spent his entire life believing that money could protect people from disappointment. Then he met Clara. She worked as a waitress at a small family restaurant called Grace's Table. She wasn't impressed by his expensive suit or his reputation because, at first, she didn't even know who he was. Nathaniel had visited the restaurant one rainy evening after a difficult business meeting. While other people around him complained about the weather, the food, and the slow service, Clara noticed an elderly homeless man standing outside in the rain. Without hesitation, she took the warm meal meant for her own dinner break and carried it outside to him. Nathaniel watched from his table. Later, when he asked why she had done it, Clara simply smiled and said that being hungry was painful, but feeling invisible was sometimes worse. Those words stayed with him. Over the next several weeks, Nathaniel returned to the restaurant more often than necessary. He discovered that Clara was 29, lived in a modest apartment, and worked 2 jobs to help pay medical bills for someone in her family. She never asked him for anything. She didn't know he was a billionaire, and when she finally discovered his identity, she became distant instead of excited. That was when Nathaniel realized he had fallen in love with her. His family strongly opposed the relationship. His mother warned him that Clara was probably after his fortune. His business partners whispered that marrying a waitress would damage his public image. Even his closest friend, Thomas Reed, told him he was moving too quickly. But Nathaniel had spent his whole life listening to people who measured everything by money. For once, he wanted to listen to his heart. 3 months later, Nathaniel and Clara married in a private ceremony in Chicago. There were no celebrities, no television cameras, and no enormous guest list. Clara wore a simple ivory wedding dress, and Nathaniel couldn't stop looking at her as she walked toward him. But something about Clara seemed different that evening. She smiled during the ceremony, but Nathaniel noticed that her hands trembled. She became unusually quiet during dinner, and when they finally arrived at his penthouse, she stood near the bedroom window as though she was preparing herself for something terrifying. Nathaniel gently asked if she was all right. Clara reached for the small envelope she had carried from the restaurant. Her hands shook as she placed it in front of him. Inside was a photograph of a little boy. Nathaniel stared at the picture. The boy had dark hair, bright brown eyes, and a small scar near his eyebrow. On the back of the photograph was a date from 8 years earlier. Then Nathaniel saw the name. Samuel Brooks. His breathing stopped. Samuel had been Nathaniel's younger brother. Or at least, that was what Nathaniel had believed. His mother had always told him that Samuel died shortly after birth. There had been no funeral, no photograph, and no grave that Nathaniel could visit. His father had refused to talk about it. Nathaniel had eventually accepted the story, even though a small part of him had always wondered what had really happened. Clara sat down, tears filling her eyes. She told him that 8 years earlier, while working at a community shelter, she had met a frightened young woman carrying a sick little boy. The woman had been desperately searching for help and had given Clara an old photograph. She claimed the boy's father belonged to the Brooks family, but had been separated from them before he could be found. Clara had spent years trying to uncover the truth. The boy was Samuel. And he was alive. Nathaniel couldn't speak. Clara explained that Samuel had been living under another surname with a foster family in Indiana. His mother had died years earlier, leaving him alone. Clara had recently discovered documents connecting the boy to Nathaniel's family. She had married Nathaniel not because she wanted his fortune, but because she desperately needed someone powerful enough to protect Samuel from people who had been trying to take control of his inheritance. Nathaniel felt betrayed, confused, and heartbroken all at once. For a moment, he wondered if the entire marriage had been a lie. But then Clara showed him the final document. It was a handwritten letter from Nathaniel's father, written years earlier. The truth was devastating. Nathaniel's father had discovered that Samuel had survived a serious illness as a baby. Instead of telling the family, he had secretly placed Samuel into another care system because he believed having another child would divide the family fortune. He had then convinced Margaret that Samuel had died. Nathaniel's entire childhood had been built on a lie. The next morning, Nathaniel drove with Clara to Indiana. When he saw Samuel for the first time, the little boy was sitting quietly beneath a tree, holding an old wooden toy. Nathaniel stood several feet away, unable to move. Samuel looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the boy asked if Nathaniel was really his brother. Nathaniel fell to his knees. He told Samuel that he was sorry he hadn't found him sooner. He promised that no one would ever make him feel unwanted again. Samuel slowly walked into his arms. And Nathaniel finally understood that there were things money could never buy back. Lost years, missed birthdays, forgotten memories, and childhood moments that should have been shared. But there was still time to love. Nathaniel brought Samuel home, arranged for the best care and education, and began rebuilding the family that had been broken by one man's greed. He also discovered that Clara had spent years helping children like Samuel without ever expecting recognition. That was when Nathaniel understood the secret behind his wedding night. Clara hadn't married a billionaire. She had married a wounded man who needed to learn how to become a brother, a husband, and eventually, a better human being. Months later, Nathaniel transformed part of his company headquarters into a foundation for children without families. Clara became its director, refusing a huge salary and insisting that every dollar should help the children. One evening, Nathaniel returned home and found Samuel and Clara laughing together in the kitchen. He stood quietly at the doorway. For the first time in his life, his enormous house didn't feel like a mansion. It felt like home. Years later, when someone asked Nathaniel what the greatest decision of his life had been, he didn't mention his company, his fortune, or any business deal. He simply smiled and said that the greatest decision he ever made was trusting the waitress who taught him that a person's value could never be measured by their bank account. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes a simple act of kindness can become the beginning of an entirely different life. And before the story ends, I want to ask you something special. Comment, "Kindness changes everything," below if you believe that love and compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. Nathaniel once thought he had everything because he had billions of dollars. But on the night he married a waitress, he discovered the truth. He didn't need another $1 million. He needed a family. And Clara didn't need a billionaire to save her. She simply needed someone willing to believe that every broken story deserved the chance to have a beautiful ending. Sometimes, the person we underestimate becomes the person who changes our entire life. And sometimes, the greatest fortune isn't found in a bank account. It's found in the people who choose to stay when they have every reason to walk away.